Hello again, everybody, and welcome inside the Howitzer and Buzz-saw Show. I am George the Howitzer Gerbo.
And I am Mike, the Buzz-saw Asti.
Sports talk back with you as we hurdle our way ever so quickly toward football season. A reminder to still hold on to summer as long as you can because there's plenty of summer left. Don't let these people pivot you to pumpkins and all that jazz immediately. But
Well, the weather's coming
we are
back. Weather's coming back. It's going to get
we're
balmy
hurtling
again,
our way
90
toward.
plus next week. We're getting excited.
Yes. Enjoy the balmy.
Yeah.
I'm very excited for the balmy.
Yeah. Coming back.
After a cold week. But yeah, we're there again, the precipice of another football season right on our doorstep. That will be the main topic of discussion and focus here on the Howitzer and Buzz-saw Show tonight. A reminder to find us wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, and more. Just search Howitzer or Howitzer Buzz-saw on your favorite podcast app. And a reminder that the music you hear every week, every month here on the HBS is courtesy of our friend B Hyphen. He's pushing out a lot of new stuff, new videos, new content. Check him out on socials at B Hyphen and at hyphenuniverse.com.
We are still waiting for the theme song, Kellen. But yes, you can also find us on social media at Mike Asti 11, at Gerbo 3, and of course the show handle at Howitzer Buzz-saw, everywhere on socials. And you can kind of smell it, but football is in the air. So even though I'm still trying to hold on to summer, and we are going to have a balmy week coming up after kind of having fall weather the last several days, you got week 0 in front of us as we're recording this show, and that does count. So we have college football, then the NFL is not too far behind. I actually believe that once we hit this coming Saturday from after recording this show here on a Thursday, we will not have another weekend without football of some kind, college or the NFL, until middle of February. And then, of course, the spring footballs, if you care about that. So we have a long journey ahead of us here with a lot of football. So get excited.
We do. It starts at the high school level and college level this week. The college level will be our first focus as the top 25 is out for this coming season. Defending champion Michigan loses a lot of talent, loses Coach Jim Harbaugh to Los Angeles to the Chargers, Southern California.
Yeah.
And eventually I'll kick that habit. They're ranked 9th in the preseason poll. Georgia, much as they were for a lot of last season, is back atop the preseason rankings. The Ohio State Buckeyes at 2, Oregon at 3, Texas 4, Alabama rounds out the top 5. Any initial surprises for you, Mike, specifically in that top 10, and anybody that should have been in this that was not? West Virginia received 17 points and approximately, I think it was 5 or 6 votes in the poll. We're not ranked. We're the Mountaineers.
Yeah, in the
I
AP,
think you could have made in the AP. I think you could have made a case for them to be down there. Iowa clocks in as the final team in the AP top 25. But anything that outright surprises you as we enter another season of college football?
Nothing too surprising. Georgia at the top, Ohio State at the top, Oregon at the top, Texas at the top. They finally are now getting love after finally being back last season. Alabama, first season without Nick Saban coming up here. They're still in that top 5. And maybe a little bit of a surprise, not a major surprise, is a lot of love to Ole Miss, Georgia out of the SEC. Now, they're normally a top 15 team perennially, but they're going to start at number 6, right behind Bama.
Kiffin and them, yep.
Yeah, so that's a great program. That's why I'm saying it's a little surprise. It's not a lot surprise. It's a great program. If you would have told me they were ranked 12th, I would have 100% thought that made some sense. And they always get preseason love too, and then they usually end up with a quality year. But 6 shows you that people are higher on them than even in the past. Notre Dame, which is, George, as you know, get ready. We're going to be debating Notre Dame all season long because they are that team as we're now in a new era of a 12-team college football playoff, the conference champs, which we'll also debate whether that's fair or not all season long, they get those top 4 spots. You're then maybe going to have a group of 5 if somebody's worthy of it. This poll tells us maybe there are some chances at the back end. They're going to have to run through a schedule and play some teams, but also Notre Dame, they can't get one of those buys. But if they are a top 10 team like they're ranked here, they're going to get in. And the schedule usually allows them that chance. They are at 7, and then Penn State, speaking of West Virginia, that's their week 1 opponent. They come in at 8, and then you mentioned 9, Florida State at 10. No major surprises there. Missouri is a program that kind of came back last year. Usually once a decade, they have a solid season. They are getting some love, so maybe some more love than I would have thought. LSU took a couple years off after the run with Joe Burrow. They're back up at the top. Something that stands out as well, George. Clemson with Dabo Swinney, they have kind of resisted the NIL era. He's complained about it a lot. They had a dynasty before NIL. They also kind of dipped in this new era of college football. They're in the top 15 in the new format here. That would put them just outside the 12-team playoff, but they're certainly a team that people believe can win the ACC. They're vying for it. They're right behind Florida State, only a few spots behind them in terms of ACC favorites. And then going the rest of the line here, a lot of this makes some sense. Kansas at 22. I think that makes sense with Daniels back. When he was healthy, they've been very good. When he's been out, and people forget he did miss half of last season, then they have lost some games. So when he's there, they can be a good program. It's not just about basketball anymore at Kansas. And then I, myself, and I'm a Big 12 voter, so I did vote them lower than a lot of my colleagues. I do believe Arizona is a little bit overrated. So they come in here at 21, and this is the AP poll. The coaches poll is a little different, but they're still a top 5 Big 12 media poll darling and all of that as this new Big 12 kicks off. George, Arizona is a program that perennially underachieves. There's a lot of talent there. Their last 10-win season was when Rich Rod was coaching. Speaking of West Virginia, they have 40 all-time bowl appearances. Arizona has like 20. Arizona is in a great media market. There's a lot of money there. In this era, they should be a solid program, which is what people are banking on here as voters. But tell me the last historically great Arizona team of our lifetime. This is just what Arizona does. They don't get to this level. So I do think they're a bit overrated. They could drop off. And then you mentioned it, West Virginia getting 17 points, which isn't exactly votes, but 17 points. They also, George, got 22 of those in the coaches poll. So a little bit more love in the coaches poll. They didn't get ranked there. It's not a big deal, even though they all talk about being slighted, because I do think these preseason rankings are a little bit, we talked about this even last year, that this new era called football, there's such a clear path now that didn't exist before. You could argue these rankings are a little bit overblown, like they're not as big of a deal, despite maybe you want to brag, but being ranked 25th or 27th outside, it really doesn't matter in all honesty, but they want to be there. And what is more confusing than the AP poll, to me, George, and this is funny. West Virginia, they haven't been ranked in the AP poll under Brown, even though I could have argued at different points than we did on this show last year. But they have been ranked inside the coaches poll. They finished last year, which is a major selector. They finished last year after the North Carolina Bowl win in 24? The final 25th, in the final 25. Coaches poll spot at 25, 25th, 24, but they finished at 25th. And they take that. That's a major selector. I even had a colleague say, your motivation to be ranked after not being ranked last year, and one of the coaches did interrupt and say, not to correct you, we were ranked 25th. Like, they want that. So my question to you is, they were ranked 25th. Okay. They were even closer to the AP poll. They were like 27th and on the outside. Now, I believe this equates them to be about 33rd in both of these major polls. They did lose Frazier and they did lose Nestor and, of course, Beanie Bishop. These are NFL players. But Wyatt Milam's getting all this preseason love. I'm sure you've seen myself and others write about it. He's getting on every damn list under the sun. Garrett Green's getting some love, even though people don't think he is. He's on all these freaking lists. They bring almost the whole team back from last year. Jaheim White should be even better. Traylon Ray should be better. C.J. Donaldson, that people thought would be gone because Jaheim emerged, he's still there. The defense replaces Beanie Bishop with another Big Ten transfer in Garnet Hollis, who is just as good. The numbers say he's basically the same. He has a backup in Jaheim Joseph, who they wouldn't have had last year. They're deeper there. And they get transfers at the wide receiver position in the red zone, which was the issue last year, and Jaden Bray and Justin Robinson from major conference programs in Oklahoma State in the Big 12 that they pluck from a rival, and then out of the SEC at Mississippi State for Justin Robinson. So my question to you, if you ranked them 25th, they had a great offseason. They didn't lose anyone outside of depth.
Returning starting quarterback, returning starting running back.
Back. They didn't fire the coach. The coach is still back. The AD is still there. All these rumors didn't happen. They're all still there. What convinced you to take them from 25th all the way to 33rd? Like, what the hell happened is my question to people that didn't vote them there in terms of the coaches. I get the AP didn't put them there before, but how did they lose standing? I think that's what's annoying Brown. Like, how did they lose standing when they were there before? We've debated whether they should deserved it last year. If you didn't want to rank them, I could hear that argument. But once they got 25, how did they fall from 25 to 33 after the offseason that I just articulated? And the teams in front of them, I think this is where the slight comes in that Brown doesn't want to say, so I'll say it. The teams in front of them are why this is a slight in both polls, the AP and the coaches poll. George, you're getting teams, and this is either ranked inside the 25 or just outside. Obviously,
I think they're better than North Carolina State. I think they're better than Arizona, so that's at least 2.
But I'm even talking about even in the ones receiving votes. So do you think they're better than Virginia Tech?
I think they're better than Tech. Yeah, the Tech hype up is interesting to me by a lot of people.
Virginia. Guarantee
Brent
you,
Pry was a bum, and in 2 years he's turned it around, and they're a top 25 contender again. I'm not so fast on that one.
No, I'm pretty sure, George. I'll bet money that week 1 or 2 we're going to look at our phones and be like, "Yep, Virginia Tech's in a dog fight with a team they never should be losing to, Old Dominion or somebody like that." But they got 77 points. The Mountaineers got 20, got 17, and then 22 in the coaches poll. Not even Virginia Tech. Do you think West Virginia deserves a top 25 spot more than Boise State? Yes or no? And obviously, I'm going to go straight to schedule. Boise State schedules is not any near as good.
At the current moment in time, yes. I think Boise State will end up shaking out as one of the group of 5 contenders for that playoff spot. But we are a long way from that,
now.
Obviously.
We're
talking about now. Boise State is the highest ranked non-power conference or highest vote point getter of the non-power conference teams. There are no, although the top 25 is all power conference teams, and then Boise State and then Liberty are the.
I was going to say Liberty's another one. Liberty now, obviously
they're better last year. West Virginia ahead of Liberty.
What about head of Iowa State? Are you buying?
I was about to say it's either right. I think Iowa State is going to have a really good year. It's either they're about on the level with Iowa State or just ahead of Iowa State.
And by the way, the Big 12 media poll, Iowa State was 6, West Virginia was 7. They both think they're slighted there. And you could even argue, and this sounds crazy, Penix Jr. is not quarterbacking Washington anymore, is he? They're getting more votes than West Virginia. I hear
that's a wholesale change in terms of the staff all went with Kalen DeBoer to Alabama, and so did a decent amount of players as well.
So I think that's where Neil Brown's slight coming in. I mean, we could debate all day, George, on who's going. This isn't this show on who's going to be in the playoff or in the conversation at the end of the year, and if you think Boise State will deserve it, I'll argue schedule, etc. But that's not what I'm asking. As we stand now in the preseason, we haven't kicked off yet. If we're going off of last year and the roster and the history, how does Boise State deserve that spot? SMU even. SMU's been a group of 5 for 30 years because of the death penalty. They're now in the ACC. They've been a 7-win team. West Virginia just won 9 in the major conference. Now SMU's going to the ACC in a major conference. We saw what Cincinnati and UCF have been doing when they're going to a major conference. They've been struggling. Are you telling me, according to these voters, that SMU is going to walk in the ACC and win 8 or 9 games immediately? Because they're getting top 25 votes. That's hard to believe based on what we've seen from group of 5s that move up. All of those programs are getting more votes than West Virginia. That's, I think, the slight. If you want to say West Virginia is not ranked, I could argue that too. Their schedule was not nearly what it was supposed to be last year because Pitt wasn't good, TCU wasn't good, Drake May didn't play for North Carolina. I get it. You could argue it was an overrated 9-win season. But once they got 25th, and then all of these programs that we're talking about, they won more games than Tech. They won more games than a lot of these teams, I'm saying, and they didn't win more than Washington, obviously, but Washington doesn't have the whole quarterback and the coaching staff, and everything's different. So are they just getting a bone because they're in the national title game, or are we talking about this roster? Like, I think it doesn't really matter, but I do think if you've even seen from the pressers in any of my coverage or anyone else's coverage, I will tell you that I do think Neil Brown, He prefers to be slighted because it helps motivate the team and they want to play with a chip
Yes.
on their shoulder, 100%. But I also do, George, think, and I've kind of got to know him long enough now, I think he's legitimately pissed, especially the coaches poll. Like, I think he likes using it as a slight, but I think he legitimately is sitting there saying, what the F? Like, how can winning 9 games at West Virginia not get 25th, but 7 wins at Virginia Tech gets you votes? That's a same cultural program.
Yeah. And if they beat Penn State, they'll be like,
sure. Yeah. Then
19th, and they'll be like 19th, or I believe they should be at least in the into the teens as a ranking if they beat Penn State week 1.
You know what Brown's going to say. They lose that game by a touchdown. He's going to sit there and say, all these teams didn't play who we played. We still had a tougher game, etc. But they have to win. But, I guess I'll pivot and ask this then. I don't believe they're going to beat Penn State, even though I think they can be more competitive. And the Vegas line is showing that. It's moved from 12.5 to 8.5. And they would have actually beat the spread last year if it wasn't for that late TD by Franklin and company. But hypothetically, let's say they lose to Penn State.
Yeah.
Toss out Albany, even though they are a very good FCS, but toss them out. And then say they beat Pitt, who they're going to be favored over, even though it's on the road and Pitt's not supposed to be good. They're 2-1, but Pitt's not going to be a quality win because they're not a good team. Even they just would have played Kent State, they would have proved nothing. Penn State would be a loss. Do you think a 2-1 West Virginia team with a loss to Penn State and Pitt not being good, does that then get them ranked?
No, they're gonna need to, if you lose the Penn State game, it's got to be somewhere in like mid-October after some teams start having some bye weeks and all that.
What if they beat Kansas in week 4? Kansas is ranked. They beat Kansas in week 4 and they're 3-1. That's not ranked.
Yeah, if Kansas stays ranked and they beat Kansas, I would say that they crack it there. The week 5 matchup, what I believe is the week 5 matchup, is October 12th against Iowa State.
Yeah, it's tough. That 5-game gauntlet when you open up conference.
Yeah, that's a very tough game in Morgantown. So I think if they beat Kansas and if they beat Kansas and you're 3-1, then yes, in my opinion, that gets you in somewhere around 22, 21. If they beat Kansas and then they beat Iowa State, or if they beat Kansas for some reason they don't get ranked, then if you beat Iowa State, they absolutely should be in as a 5-1 team with quality 3 Power 5 wins, including over a preseason ranked team and an Iowa State team who I believe eventually will be ranked this season.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but I do think they could argue for it at 2-1. They certainly would get it if they beat Kansas. And my argument would be what it normally is with the schedule conversation. If you don't rank them at 2-1, you're basically saying they need to have the best win out of any of these teams in the debate in order to get ranked. Like, none of these teams we're debating are playing a top 10 team. You know what I mean? Virginia Tech's their craps out of conference schedule they put together every year. So is it really fair to let Virginia Tech roll the Old Dominions of the world and then West Virginia loses to Penn State and say, well, you should have won? They're playing a top 10 team. But that is the issue when you have these games scheduled this way, that you're able to prove yourself. As you said, you win it, you're arguably top 15 from not being ranked. But if you lose it, you're probably holding water. But they do have a path to get ranked. And the blessing off of the 5-game gauntlet, as tough as it's going to be, even if you get out of it with 2 losses there and you go 3-2 in that 5-game gauntlet in the Big 12 and you have the Penn State loss, if you look at the end of the schedule, George, they could win 4 in a row to end the year. I mean, those are all bad teams at the end of the year. So they have a path to a 9-10 win season. And as Brown said, you can argue about it all day you want. Yes, all the great teams are probably in the Big 10 and SEC. Maybe they will deserve 4 or 5 teams apiece in the playoff. But if we win the Big 12, we're in the playoff. That is the path. You win the conference, you get in. You could even lose your out-of-conference games. George, there could be a scenario, and I know that we'll end up debating this on this show, and it'll be the most annoying thing that could exist in the whole season. Penn State could beat West Virginia by 20 points and finish 3rd in the Big 10 because it's so stacked now, not be a playoff team because they're just outside the rankings. And if West Virginia wins the Big 12, they then are in as a 4 seed at worst. And that's going to be a whole debate. It's how is that fair? Because then you have a head-to-head example, and it really wouldn't be. But that's the format right now that West Virginia can take advantage of and flip the program. But then it obviously could go the other way too.
I want to touch on Notre Dame can't believe that I'm the one that wants to touch on Notre Dame.
No,
It's
I brought up
interesting.
Notre Dame.
Obviously,
Yeah.
Obviously, the expanded playoff helps them with the 12 teams. Of course, they're ranked 7th.
Yeah.
This is the schedule is interesting for them because they open at Kyle Field at the 12th man at Texas A&M, which will likely be their toughest game of the season. They host they host Florida State in November, and then between that, it's a muck of games they should easily roll. Northern Illinois,
Sure.
Purdue was one of the worst teams in the Big Ten last year. Miami of Ohio, Louisville is the next
Louisville's
decent game
getting
in
votes.
there.
Louisville's getting votes.
Yeah. Louisville's a decent game. So they go 4 weeks, 3 weeks with nothing. Stanford at home, Georgia Tech, Navy, Army, Virginia. And then they've got 3 ranked teams. They've got A&M. They close the season with Southern California in SC in the Coliseum, and then Florida State. So that's an interesting dynamic. They're a road underdog, of course, even though they're the higher seeded team. They're going to College Station. If they lose that game against Texas A&M, they'll still be in the top 25. But then you're playing a lot of middling teams there until you get really to that Florida State game. So it could, I don't want to say make or break early for Notre Dame, but if you beat the top 25 team on the road that you're slated to face, that keeps you in the top 10, most likely all the way until your next ranked opponent. If you lose, you're going to fall to maybe 17, even though it is a ranked team. And then you got to claw your way back up in that position. Whereas if you get this one early, a very tough game on the road for them, then you stay in that prime position, in that playoff position, until your tougher games come later down the road. Not until November, really, do the games get tough for them.
Yeah, but it's almost death taxes in this being the situation for Notre Dame. I mean, every year they did it with Ohio State recently. They have a really behemoth, giant, primetime, major competitor, history-ridden game in week 1 or week 0, and obviously they're going to Dublin this year. And
that
then
Stanford game, now a conference game for them.
Right.
Loosely branded conference game.
Well, a loose one. Yeah, they're an independent. That's the whole thing. I mean, if they were in the ACC, then they would, George, if they were in the ACC, they would, you're talking about this being easier. If they were in the ACC, they would have a clear path, because what you're saying wouldn't matter. They would just win the conference probably, or at least compete with it for Clemson. And then they would at least be a top 4 seed. But it's not really a conference situation because they're not in the ACC in football, despite the schedule conversation that they have. But this is what Notre Dame does all the time. They have a really tough game opening the year. They have an easy schedule in the middle, and then they have tougher games at the end. And, honestly, George, while it'll be interesting how they're treated if they would lose and then they have those easy games, what Notre Dame is going to give you is, we've seen this in recent years with the 4-team playoff that everyone debated, including us. Well, this doesn't make sense here, or this doesn't make sense there, or this team has this win, or this team that. And okay, but then you look at the end of the year, all these preseason ranks now, and even when the college football, we've talked about this before, even when the college football playoff throws their ranking out in week 7 or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's way too soon. They really shouldn't give it to you until the end of the season, because what Notre Dame is going to be a test for is how does the committee handle, in the 12-team playoff era, the body of work argument versus just knee-jerk, what have you done for me right now? Based on what you're saying, if they lose to Texas A&M and then they have 3-4 weeks of playing nobody, do they deserve to be ranked? Do they deserve top 20, top 15? Probably not. But once they put forth the schedule where they have Louisville and they have Florida State. So like if they lose to Texas A&M, George, but then they beat Louisville and beat Florida State, that overall body of work is going to look top 10 worthy again. Because while they had slop in the middle, name me a program that has 3 ranked opponents off a preseason ranking going into the year. I mean, West Virginia is maybe, depending on what happens in the Big 12, they actually are one of them, but there's not that many out there. So if they get 3 ranked wins and these teams hold water and do what they're supposed to do, which we know will not always be the case, they will end the year with 3 ranked opponents at minimum. That is better than a lot of programs can say, even though they also have some group of 5 opponents in there. But so does a lot of teams in major conferences and out of conference play. So I don't have a problem with their schedule, but it'll be interesting on how they're treated, because it really won't matter what happens in week 3 or 4 to them as they're rolling group of 5 teams. It'll matter what happens later on in the season if they actually beat quality opponents and then their overall body of work is sound. But that'll be interesting in how Notre Dame is handled. Outside of the teams we mentioned, though,
yeah,
anyone in this, well, go ahead.
Yeah, SEC puts in 8 to lead all conferences.
Yeah.
Big Ten puts in 6.
Yeah.
Ironically, Maryland, who will not have as good of a season as West Virginia does. Maryland has 4 ranked opponents this year, all Big Ten teams, both at the top and the bottom there. The one mutual opponent that the Mountaineers and Terps share this year is Penn State, and that's kind of like a weird sticking point.
And they shared it last year too. That was the same situation last year.
Yeah. We're grandfathering them in here, in my opinion, at 8.
Penn State,
Michigan, rightful drop to 9. I don't think a non JJ McCarthy Michigan squad is a spot worse than Penn State, in my opinion. Penn State, I would say, if you're telling me give them a number, I'd say 12.
Yeah, I mean, Michigan's been beating Penn State in recent years, and they still have a solid roster.
I think Florida, of the teams that are directly behind Penn State, I think Michigan is better than them right now. I think Florida State is better than them right now. Missouri is an interesting one. Eli Drinkwitz has done a really interesting job. They're like a sneaky team for
they're very underrated. Yeah.
With Utah and returning quarterback, them joining the Big 12, they're the favorites to win the conference. I think they're better than Penn State right now. And of course, a lot of that, Mike, for Penn State, just your thoughts on their kind of projection here. A lot of it hinges on Drew Aller. Is Drew Aller this guy who was heralded when they brought him in 2 seasons, when he committed 2 seasons ago, to be this transcendent? They really love Sean Clifford and hated Sean Clifford at the same time. Now back up with the Packers.
Yeah, everyone didn't love Sean Clifford. Yeah,
but he got them that Rose Bowl win over the aforementioned Utes, and so now Drew Aller was the guy. Drew Aller's the guy. Well, it's year 2 now of going to be of the full time Drew Aller experience, and Penn State fans believe that he's going to be this transcendent. Todd Blackledge type of guy that they haven't had since, Kerry Collins, Todd Blackledge, those days at Penn State, which isn't known for their quarterback production historically. Is that going to be the case? Can they punch through now in a divisionless Big Ten where, Ohio State and Oregon are your top 2 favorites there, but in the same way, Maryland gets a reprieve from not playing the East Division. So does Penn State, where they don't have to play.
Penn State's really benefiting, right?
And Ohio State. And those type of teams. So could that is it going to be the time? Because if not, you got a lot of people who just are not happy with going to and winning the Rose Bowl occasionally, and have James Franklin on a leash there, a short leash there. It seems like from time to time.
Well, Penn State is by far the program,
and a loss in Morgantown would turn that up to 1,000.
Well, sure, but regardless, even if they beat West Virginia, Penn State is the one program in the country. If somebody would ask me who is under the most pressure in the new Big 12 format, it is not any of the teams we mentioned. It is not even Notre Dame, even though when they say they don't want to do the conference thing and they take the lower seeding, you could argue there's pressure there to kind of do what they are saying they arrogantly can do. And I hear them because, again, I do think they play enough ranked teams compared to everybody else, but it's not Notre Dame. The program that is under the most pressure in this new big playoff format, Big Ten expanded conference, 12-team playoff situation is Penn State. In the last decade, if there was a 12-team playoff, they would have been in 6 times. 6 times. They ended up in a goose egg. So yes, they have the Rose Bowl win. And yes, that is historic. Joe Paterno only won 1. I mean, that's 1 for Franklin. You're even up there. That's a big deal to win the Rose Bowl. That's why they got in the Big Ten in the first place. However, George, knowing Penn State fans, even in the Rose Bowl season, they were not popping champagne. They were sitting there saying, my wife's one of them. She literally was saying, yeah, this is a big deal, but how big is it when you can't beat your rivals and the other state schools you're not even close to? That's, I think, the problem. It's not like they're losing by a field goal. Michigan destroys them by 20 points in the Harbaugh era towards the end. They can't beat Ohio State to save their life. Now, as you're mentioning, of course, neither can Maryland, neither can anybody else in the Big Ten. The issue is nobody can hang with those two programs in the last 3 or 4 years. Sure, but nobody cares that Maryland loses to Michigan and Ohio State. Everybody cares when Penn State loses to those programs because Penn State's supposed to be on their level. They want to actually vie for national title. They feel like they should be in the playoff. They feel like they were slighted years ago when they won the conference but didn't get in because of strength of schedule and different debates there in the 4-team playoff. They obviously would have been in if it was this format. So Penn State is under the most pressure by far in the 12-team playoff era to actually get it done. And I will say, George, forget whether it's win the conference or getting in as an outsider or hosting a playoff game or being ranked 8 or even getting ranked 12th. The bar for Franklin this year now, he has to get in. He has to crawl in somehow, even if it's 12. Yes, people will say it should be better than that, but he needs to get in. It may sound unreasonable, but 10 wins a year, great. Here's the problem. James Franklin and Penn State, they beat everyone they're favored to beat. They're favored to beat West Virginia again. They've been favored to beat Maryland. They win those games. They win those games handily. Yeah. Great. Good for you. You're favored. But in the games they're not favored to win when they are the underdog, Ohio State, Michigan, not only do they lose, but they can't even perform, and they're not even near those teams. The reason why I think they got the bump over Michigan this year is, number one, Michigan did lose their QB, did lose their head coach. Ohio State still has a lot of that. They kept Day. They're kind of bringing continuity back. The Michigan's not, even though there's talent with the Wolverines. But you mentioned it, it's Drew Aller. So Michigan loses its QB. Penn State has their 5-star QB still there. People do feel like he's better than a season ago. He went through a maturation process. We will see if he's better or not. I do think the Mountaineer secondary is even better than it was. I think there's depth there. I think he will be tested even if they win. So we will see how good he really is. They're going to go as far as he takes them. But they also are a team that doesn't really throw a deep ever. They win off defense. So, yeah, he might be better, but that's not the recipe. That's not the recipe for Penn State. So what really can he do? I mean, if I was Drew Aller's dad, I would never have told him to go there. I would have said, if you're a 5-star kid, they don't throw the ball. But nonetheless, they're going to try, and he's supposedly better, and he's more dynamic, and we'll see what they do. They're supposedly going to open it up and open up the playbook. We'll see if it's open, George. I feel like some Novocaine offense of a lot of running is going to happen, but we'll see if it's opened, and they got to get in somehow. But I do like a phrase that Colin Cowherd said the other day when he was previewing the game. Penn State's been perennially a number 3 team in the Big Ten, but now that the Big Ten's expanded, they're going to be in the back of the bullpen if they don't watch themselves. Like you got Oregon to mess with, you got USC to mess with. These are historic programs that are going to get great recruiting classes every year. A lot more programs to mess with now, and you could go from 3 to 6, 7, and then what does that do for you? Winning the conference seems almost impossible, but there will be a lot of at-large bids from the SEC and the Big Ten. I don't think, the Big 12 champ, the ACC champ, that might be it, maybe one more team, but those Big Ten and SEC, those are going to be the bids for most of this playoff, and Penn State just has to get one. What I will ask you here, though,
only 2 ranked teams on the schedule for the Nittany Lions at the current moment,
and not including West Virginia.
They'll be on the road against Southern California, and they've got the Buckeyes in a home game the first weekend in November, which will likely be their whiteout moment of 2024 in Happy Valley.
What's interesting about week 1, George, and what you just said about Penn State there about the ranked opponents, after the game against West Virginia, saying Penn State does win, even though they're on the road and maybe they won't, but say they win, and it'll even be a bigger coup for them because they'll do it on the road. They need to root for the Mountaineers like crazy.
For West Virginia to turn into a ranked team. Yeah.
Because that is the one team on their schedule. I mean, the other option is if Maryland has a better year than they were supposed to last year when they underachieved and they crawl in there because they upset somebody. But outside of Maryland, which I don't think is going to happen, if they were going to do that, it would have been last year. Yeah. So if we agree it's not Maryland, the other option is West Virginia then. So the other option is you beat West Virginia, whether it's by 20 or by 3. You need to root for the Mountaineers to win the brawl, to beat Kansas, to win some of these Big 12 games, maybe even win the damn conference, or even if they don't, win 9 or 10 games again and crawl in that top 25. So at the end of the year, when people bring a body of work, you can say we have 3 ranked opponents, not 2. that is going to be a big deal when they're trying to get an at-large bid, and we don't figure them to win the conference. So if they don't win the conference, they got to be Mountaineer fans after that game, probably more than anybody in the country outside of the state of West Virginia and Mountaineer Nation all over the place. That is a real thing that's going to exist now. You really got to root for the teams that you play to do well and beef up that schedule, certainly if you don't win your conference. But what I do want to finish on before we wrap up college football altogether, we mentioned a lot of these teams, some surprises. A lot of this is what we expected, and I do think West Virginia should slide in there, but they didn't get ranked, so kind of, oh well. They could prove themselves when the year opens up. Out of these teams here that are ranked, top 10, top 15, or you can go all the way up to the top 25, to end it on a negative note here, which one of these teams jumps out at you? Not a team that has opportunity or we think is good or has been slighted, but which one of these teams jumps out at you as a team that is just fully overrated, in your eyes, is not going to stay in the top 25? You would not vote them there. They don't deserve the spot, and they just, or is nobody in that situation for you? Does any team jump out at you as the people are missing it? They're not really a good team. They could end up as a 6-win team, but they're preseason ranked right now.
I don't think, it's tricky. I don't think Miami's earned it yet. Pivotal.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
Pivotal. They're 19th overall. Pivotal year 3 for Mario Cristobal and this rebuild, which everybody thought Manny Diaz was going to be the Manny Diaz rebuild. Now he ended up being Penn State's defense coordinator. And so a lot of optimism, but this is correct. It's still a Hurricanes team that has made multiple foibles in the last couple of years, including running when they had the game won against Georgia Tech, and they should have taken a knee and then ran instead and fumbled and then lost the game. That is a moment that has happened in the last 12 months, my friend.
That's the year that they could have been back if they would have won that game. That ruined that whole era, really. But yes.
So, Miami is like a receiving votes type of team to me. I agree with you on Arizona. I don't get that. Congratulations, Arizona made it out of the Pac-12 and they're in the Big 12 now. You're Arizona.
They make sense as a team to put in the conference. They bring a lot of fans.
Oh, yeah. I didn't mean that to be belittling them being in the conference. No, you just got out of the Pac-12 and irrelevancy. You don't suddenly get to be number 21 in the land. When the last 2 sole seasons, when you've been relevant in my lifetime / the last 20 years, the one year that Kevin Sumlin, who's now at Maryland, was their coach, they had a good season, and the Rich Rod year, that's it. That's 2 solitary seasons I can remember in the last decade. There's nothing continuity wise that Arizona's done in the last 5 years that merits them being the number 21 ranked team in the country. In my opinion,
it's not even just this year.
Iowa State should be ranked over them. West Virginia even should be a higher in that totem pole. In my opinion. So,
you could argue, although I do think that the game is in Arizona this year. So I do think that the West Virginia is going to probably lose that game. That's a long travel. We're going to find that out. They're going to play this year. And I do have that penciled in as a West Virginia loss. But to your point, and when what I thought was the case, George, guess how many bowl appearances Arizona football has in their entire history of 125 years. And that West Virginia has 40, which is a higher number than a lot of people think they do have. Where do you think Arizona is? Because they're getting votes.
I'm gonna go 10, and I feel like that's too many.
No, both overall appearances, not wins. Are you still going 10?
Yeah, I'll go.
No, they have more. They have more appearances. I'm not saying just.
Oh, wins. Okay. All right. So I'll go 20 in their entire history then. That's like 10%.
You're basically right. That's kind of right where they are. So their bowl record all time is 10-11-1. 10-11-1.
But they've been playing football like West Virginia since the late 1800s. Like it's 100 plus years.
They started playing football in 1899.
Yeah,
so a little bit after George. Let me repeat myself. They started playing football in 1899.
That means this year we're celebrating the 125th season of Arizona football.
We are, yes. We are, and that's on their website, actually.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
I did the math there, journalism.
And their all-time bowl record is at 477% at 10-11-1. And there's a lot of programs that didn't win too many. I mean, West Virginia only has 17 bowl wins, but they have 40 bowl appearances.
It's about as average as you could get, though, for Arizona,
My point is not the bowl wins, though. My point is, I get you should win the game when you're there. Sure, that's, West Virginia should have more than 17 out of 40. That's not what I'm talking about. They only got, George, in order to be a bowl team since like the 70s, you got to win 6 games. That's it. They have basically 20 bowl appearances here, 21, 22 bowl appearances here. So from then on, and some of those are before that time, so not even in modern era. You didn't even win 6 games. I'm talking about getting in the game. I'm not talking about winning the game, George. I mean, come on now. They have not even cracked 125 years in existence. They haven't even appeared in 25 postseasons in their entire existence. So they are perennially underachieving. I mean, Maryland and West Virginia double them up in bowl appearances. Double them up. And they are in Arizona with a great recruiting base, and they were in a major conference. The Pac-12 had national champs, had dynasties. We make fun of it now, but it was even good on the field last year. So they didn't even get 6+ wins, 25 times in the last 100+ years of college football. Or what are we? That's insane. That's mind-blowing. So the point of it is they perennially underachieve, and that's why I don't buy them. Maybe it's too much onto history, but they just scream to me as an overrated program. I mean, they've been doing it year after year.
I'm trying to find holes because history does tell us that among very specifically this top 10 group of preseason teams,
someone's going to drop off.
Roughly, and I forget the number, the actual stat, but I'm going to ballpark it here. They're roughly 70%. So roughly 7 out of those 10 teams, or 6 out of those 60 to 70% of those teams that are in the top 10 will remain there in some capacity by the end of the season. So that leaves some holes to be poked. I already told you Penn State. I don't think they're overrated. I just think, I guess I do think they're overrated. I think they should be a little bit lower. But one team that's I'll lump in there that's maybe a little more quote unquote prestige is Clemson. And that's mainly because this newfangled ACC, there's very little room. They are the conference that's under.
It's easier to win now, though. They win it. They're 4 seed.
Well, it's easier to win it, but you open with Georgia.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks later, I don't want to give them West Virginia.
But who's going to hold that loss against them? I mean, they're not going to move down for losing to Georgia.
What if Georgia boat races?
Okay, but if they boat race them, but what if Georgia wins by 10 or less? Are you moving them down? I mean, Georgia's number 1.
Yeah, I mean, they might bump down to 17 or 16.
But I mean, now we're just
whatever.
Yeah, now
we're moving. But I give you that 3 of their first 5 games are against ranked teams. So they open with Georgia. 2 weeks later, they've got North Carolina State, I believe, and then 2 weeks after that, they've got Florida State. And so if you lose the Georgia game, NC State plays you tough. It's a home. They host NC State, I think. And then you've got to go to Doak Walker and to Tallahassee and play the Seminoles, and you lose that game. Now Florida State's in theory got the upper hand on you to win the conference the rest of the way, and you're already a 2-loss team with some other, they got to go to Virginia Tech. Nothing crazy, but they got to go to Virginia Tech. They've got to go to Pitt, which they've Pitt.
Hey, they should root Virginia Tech to get ranked. Then they should be all about Virginia Tech getting some votes. I'm sure they should be voting for Virginia Tech. But
they've got Louisville. They got to play South Carolina like they do every year. So I'm just saying that are they going to fall out of the top 25? No, but if you lose 2 of your first, even though they're ranked games, if you lose 2 of your first 5 games, or even potentially 3 of your first 5 games, that it puts you behind the 8 ball immediately after a month.
And especially, we've seen this in recent years, certainly in this era after their dynasty, they notoriously start slow. They play, not only do they not win, you mentioned boat racing, they play bad and get boat raced early in the seasons in these quality games. So they could get boat raced to Georgia. They don't basically wake up until week 3 or 4. And then what they do is they end up with 2 losses early in the season to good teams usually. And then they boat race the easy ACC schedule. They're probably going to destroy those teams in the middle of the pack ACC. They'll have that tough game. They'll end up destroying South Carolina because they really care about that.
And then there's always one with a question mark, like them at Heinz Field, and Pitt wins by like 10.
Yeah. But so what I'm saying is, in this last 3 years, this NIL era, they end up with an 8-3 regular season all the time with a couple early good losses. They have one upset loss, and they dominate everybody else. And that's going to probably be a top 25 team, but that's not a playoff team. That's not an ACC champ team even. That's not what they should be based on what they just were in the previous era. So, yeah, they're a team to bring up. I think the other teams to bring up here that I do want to get out there before we move on to the NFL, and they're in this. You mentioned 70%. Some of these teams are going to drop off. Well, I think a screamer here, George, in this top 10, and it's not to say that I think they're not good and they can't hang, because they have been good, at least off the last prior season, but that's Texas. They're moving from the Big 12, where they basically guarantee a Big 12 title based on, the last year or so. They have all the talent and all the recruits once they got their program built back up again. But in the SEC, that conference title is far from guaranteed. They're going to have a really tough schedule. They're going to play more ranked teams. It's going to be tougher for them, and they come in at number 4. Do they hold that? They open with Colorado State. They should win that handily. Granted, Colorado State can compete with some teams, but they are in a much tougher conference now. Just to see the teams below them, Bama, Ole Miss, they're all SEC teams in their conference now, whereas before they were obviously in the Big 12 and could win that and then rely on that to get them in. And then obviously just outside the top 15, another team jumping Big 12 to SEC is Oklahoma, who, unlike Texas that won it last year, they had been fading in recent seasons. They still win the 8, 9, 10 games, but they're not nearly what they have been throughout history. They dominate West Virginia, but they can't dominate anybody else who's the top dogs. And how do they fare in the SEC? Because they're behind a lot of SEC teams, LSU, Tennessee, right now, Missouri, in these rankings, and even some others. So where do they go? Do they stay ranked? Do they stay relevant? These are going to be teams that are going to be likely vying for at-large bids. No longer are they going to have a chance to win a conference title in the Big 12. It's going to be harder to do that in the SEC, and they're going to have to get an at-large bid, figuring they don't win that conference. Same thing Penn State's been dealing with for a decade. They're going to have to keep on dealing with now. So that'll be the issue of the Power 4 versus the Power 5. Yeah, it's great to win a conference title and get in that way. We can debate all day whether that's fair or not, but those programs are likely not winning the conference. So they're going to have to worry about their record, their strength of schedule, their at-large, their body of work, and what they can actually do to hang fully. It'll be a tougher situation for them now than it was. So those are obviously teams to watch too, as they transition into a much tougher league and really the top dog of college football in the SEC.
And I'll leave us with this one thing. If big picture and fast forwarding to December already, just in terms of the 12-team thing, I have warmed over the summer and going into this now more to, you and I both were, preferred an 8-team, but since the ridiculous cataclysm that has been this realignment, where we're now down to 4 true major conferences, that maybe the 12-team is going to kind of be the best of, give you the best.
Well, they're already talking about going to 14 though.
I stop it. We got it. I know that's the 2 years down the road.
But they've been talking about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Mike's correct. I believe they've approved it in 2 years. We'll see how that shakes out. But you've got 12 teams for at least 2 years. So I've warmed to 12. We'll get to 14 when we come to it. But I say all that to say that we're going to get, for college football fans, it's going to be fun to get some unique things like playing a bowl type playoff game on campus stadiums. That's going to be cool. Yep. Don't look at the schedule yet, because it's going to really confuse you. The dates are super wonky because they've the NFL, which historically has had an agreement where once college football's regular season ends, that Thanksgiving weekend, that Saturday Thanksgiving weekend, then the NFL can start playing games on those Saturdays. Well, that's still in effect right now, which means that you've got some of these CFP playoff games that people may not realize are going to be played on Thursdays and Fridays in the month of December. And by the way, the national championship game lines up on Inauguration Day, which is also Martin Luther King Day. So throw that into the mix, like just a crackpot, whole bunch of things going on there. So that's going to take some getting used to. Like, it took us a year or two, and we got used to having a New Year's 6 and playing major bowl games on New Year's Eve as the ball's dropping in Times Square and Georgia's kicking a field goal and missing a field goal against Ohio State. But fans are going to have to get used to some of these times, at least for the next 2 years, of these playoff games taking place early in December, preceding even the bowl season. Who should be
the big winner in all this? Off the grid, the NHL. No, seriously, they do Winter Classic, their outdoor games in that first of the year, January 1. That neighborhood,
Rose Bowl's trying to hold on to it, but that's about it at this point.
Yeah, just Rose Bowl. But they sometimes have the Heritage Classic and the other ones later in the month. But that end of December all the way to February. They're playing those outdoor games, and they have been putting them head to head with major college bowl games. They're never going to win that rating battle. They already got the NFL playoff to deal with. Now, maybe they get them on an off day. Maybe they actually are the game in town and the marquee event, even though it's a niche sport in comparison to major college football, obviously. So that's an odd thing. They may almost luck out and get that W. And what I will actually leave us with, I'm just gonna dangle that out there for people listening. I don't even need us to fully debate this. Maybe we can do it next show. But I had somebody bring this up to me the other day. And especially for programs that are not Alabama, programs that we cover in Maryland, West Virginia, there's history there, but it would be a big deal to even be a part of the playoff. Would you rather win a conference championship, have the trophy for West Virginia? That'd be the 16th total. That's actually a relatively high number throughout history. I know what they would do to celebrate it, when it would be a lot of what I've been wanting them to do about respecting the history of the program. They have flat told me they're waiting for another conference title. If they win it, they would do a lot of things. That would arguably be the most impressive one, because they would be part of this Power Four, etc. And obviously, if Maryland wins, it's the Big Ten. It's a gigantic thing. Yeah, you get in the playoff. But my question is, would you rather win a conference title, get in the playoff, you then have that bye, but you're probably going to lose after that, or you get in as an at-large bid, and if West Virginia beats Penn State, they would absolutely have a resume to get in as an at-large, even if they don't win the conference, because you can host a playoff game. And what that would mean financially, the fans would be there. It would be lit there. You would never be able to really duplicate that in history of the program, because you're hosting a playoff game. You've been in big games and major bowls, etc. We can argue about what should be claimed, but that would be hosting a playoff game. You'd have those pictures, the imagery and videos forever, even if you don't win.
They host a playoff game,
or they win a conference title. Or they win a conference title, they have the bye, but they don't win any more games. So they don't win a national title off of it. They just get the conference title, you get that trophy, you get that ring, but you do nothing with it, and you have the bye, you're in the playoff. But the other option is you host a playoff game, win or lose, you get that atmosphere. Because if you have the bye as the conference champ, you don't host at home.
This is what normally I have like a decided position. This is one of your better ones. I'm giving you credit for that. This is one of your better questions, which is great. And I'm going to stick out and assume that the money is negligible in terms of difference. Like I would say,
I didn't do the money research here, but I'm talking. I mean,
no, I'm not even asking you to. Pretty much, I'm saying the home playoff game at Mountaineer Field. That's freaking awesome. Because I'm leaning there, unless for some reason, by virtue of them winning the Big 12, it gives them $20 million. That's a crazy number.
Money would come in just from winning it, because even appearing in the major bowl game, you get money. So But
if there is a significant if there is a 7-figure financial difference in them winning the conference championship, then I'd rather them win the conference championship, because they're not going to make that up playing the home game in Morgantown. But let's say it's equal, or it's like $1 million or $2 million. No, give me the game, and give me a friggin' playoff game at night in Morgantown.
I can't guarantee
that. Oh my God. Yeah. That's my God. I can't even.
No, that would be lit. But that would be lit.
That's special.
That would be lit. But by the way, I will say, and I'm not going to say who answered this for me within the program, but I did float this out there. The program wants the conference title more. I'll tell you that right now.
Oh, sure. Oh, 100%. I'm speaking as a fan with an assumption that, like, hey, West Virginia won the Big 12 and they go to whatever the quarterfinal is, and they still bleep and lose the game, and it's in Atlanta. No,
but hypothetically, when you think about it, George, it's just, if you compare this to the NFL playoffs, for example.
Yeah.
If you get a top 2 seed and you get a bye, but you get a top. We've seen Dallas do this repeatedly. Say hypothetically, you get a top 2 seed, you get a bye, and then you lose right away. You're still losing in the divisional round versus somebody else who won a wild. Again, this is the NFL example. Is it better to win a wild card game and then lose in the divisional round, or to get a bye and then lose in the divisional round? You can make an argument that yes, they have one playoff win, you do not, but you're 0-1, they're 1-1. You did better by getting the bye, like you want the bye. So my question was that you would host the playoff game, and even if you win it, you would lose the next round. So you would lose at the same spot. So that's why I could push back and say, I get what you're saying about the atmosphere.
If you lose at the same spot, then all the conference title thing is, we get to hang a banner that says conference title. Again, presuming there's no substantial financial difference.
Well, number one, if it's just about money, sure, and the atmosphere obviously would be lit for hosting the game versus having to have everybody travel, and you would lose the right to host.
Because they'll bring in a great, and there's still money to be had. Adding the like the Penguins playing more playoff games is good for the team because it helps give the team money.
Right.
And there's certain pots of money they get in terms of a playoff game that they otherwise wouldn't get during the regular season. To have another gate in Morgan, to have a 7th game or whatever in Morgantown like that, and it to be something that special, I think is pretty cool and pretty unique. And if you're telling me that
I don't know if that, yes, 100%. But and the other argument is, though, winning the Big 12 in the Power Four era.
I'm not arguing that the title means more. It definitely means more. Yeah, it's more significant.
My question is, you couldn't do both. I'm saying that if you host, the issue with I don't think it's an issue, but the current format is you have to pick and choose. Basically, if you win the conference title, you don't host right away. So you have the bye and then you play the other game, and that's traveling.
You dangled home playoff game. And when I think the national collective consciousness thinks of, oh man, we're going to have playoff games at home sites, they're thinking big. They're thinking the Big House. They're thinking Ohio Stadium. They're thinking the LA Coliseum. They're thinking these very Darrell K. Royal Stadium at Texas. These very
even Beaver Stadium if Penn State would get
the Tigers Den, Beaver Stadium. They're thinking these very iconic places. For friggin' West Virginia, who punches above our weight in literally everything we do in this state and at the university level as well, to host a playoff football game at night. At Milam with no advancing regard, the end result is still the same. Yeah, give me the freaking amazing atmosphere of the home game.
Because you know what somebody else
in Atlanta or New Orleans in a dome.
You know what somebody else who's also a Pittsburgh guy brought up to me as a comparison for an analogy. He actually said that could be like the Pirates in the 2013 wildcard game, where they didn't win the pennant, but the image 100%. Of Cueto dropping the ball because the crowd was so into it is living forever. So you would get that imagery if West Virginia hosted, but obviously the goal is to win the conference. And I am telling you, they are dangling out respecting history and all this by winning another conference. So again, I do think the West Virginia program is underrated historically. We've argued about this ad nauseum. Everything I want will happen if they win the Big 12. I'm telling you, they want one more. They don't want to just putter it with 8-9 win seasons. They want a special year, and they'll do all this. And this might include a new press box with all of this has been discussed. I'm not the only person saying this. They want the conference title first. I don't know if getting getting a home playoff game and losing is them doing all of this. They never said that. Now, maybe you're arguing the money would be the same. Why couldn't you build it off of that money? But we don't know the money's the same. Maybe they know it's not the same.
For the purpose of this argument, I am saying all things being equal instead of the money. I am assuming that
we could know the money's not going to be the same. Maybe Ren knows.
Yeah. You're giving me, block some things out and just give me experience versus experience. Yeah, I want the experience of the home play, knowing the result is the same that they lose. I want the home playoff game in Morgantown as opposed to, they got a first round bye and they're playing LSU in Atlanta and it's bleeping 75% Tiger fans or something like that. Give me. Yeah. So, but no, I'm a little bit of having my cake and eat it too here. I understand what an actual conference title in a Power 4 era would mean for the program. That does a lot of things, but also at the same time, the conference titles are very forgettable. Like Kansas State that one time, and Baylor was in the playoff, those type of things. Or sorry, TCU. Kansas State won the playoff. Yeah, and so sometimes, it's great to have,
but not to them. It's forgettable to us, but not to them.
Yeah, I'd say it definitely none of the program loves hanging your hat on pegs. Like we won blank bowl, we won a conference. It is a championship. They get rings, like you said. All that stuff goes along with it. I think the collective conscious is like, but you got in the playoff and you crapped it all away. So
sure, but I do think getting a Big 12 title ring would mean more than a Duke's Mayo Bowl ring. Like that would be a big deal.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, and that's just that. So we can have a longer
Yeah.
conversation about it later. I didn't even want to do the debate here, but that's something to leave everybody with. And the one I did in the off season, by the way, that I'll also leave you with, which I think is an easy
It's good.
answer.
That's one of your good coin flip type of questions. That one I think is pretty narrow because I think you'll have a lot of fans that will say, "Give me the experience."
You can argue both. You might, but you can argue
people that can never go, and tickets will be whatever tickets are. But people that be like, I'm from West Virginia, and I can't go to Phoenix. I can't get to, it's a lot of money, even for me who travels.
Moneybags Gerbo is going to pay his way to go to any of these events.
Or go to New Orleans. I've never been to a West Virginia bowl game. I would like to go at some point in my life. I've been to 3 Maryland ones. I've covered them, but for a lot of people in the state to say they can go to Morgantown and see WVU play in a playoff, like how special, how significant that is for a state like West Virginia, where the stadium is the biggest city by 10,000 people in the state on game days. Like that's different. Yeah,
I hear you, but a conference title, and you have to also picture a conference title would almost get a de facto extra bowl game because you would get the pageantry of being in Dallas. You get that, you'd hold the sign. You'd be on national TV. That would really help. I think that would help overall more.
Way more significant overall for the program is the conference title. If you're choosing experience based on the cool factor and what's accessible,
it might depend on who you're asking. Asking a fan versus asking the program.
It's good. It's an excellent question. It's really good.
And the other one, by the way, which we don't have to fully go into, I think is an easier answer, but I did hear some pushback. I put this up earlier in the summer off a show, is would you rather, so you can only pick one or the other scenario. You either win the Big 12, but lose the rivalry games. So Penn State, maybe even Pitt, but you just sucking out of conference play, but you win the Big 12 and then you're in the playoff that way. Or you beat Penn State, you beat them handily, you celebrate it. It says 1984, 1988, 2024, like on sports page, on the wall, all that. Then you go to Pittsburgh, you destroy the Panthers, all of that. But then you crap the bed in the Big 12 and you're not a playoff team. Which scenario would you prefer? And by the way, the program wants the conference title again. Because I've heard the argument is you got to get in the playoff. That's the goal. The out-of-conference games do not mean as much in this era, and that's fact. It sucks because that's not the fabric of college football. And those are the rivals, but that is
the fabric of college football is a tattered ass fabric at this point. Yeah,
right. But I mean,
that on the edges.
The path is you win the conference you're in. I guarantee Neil Brown, in his heart of hearts, would take a Pitt loss and win the Big 12.
Oh yeah. And again,
it would suck. I mean, I did hear some pushback because fans. I actually had some fans tell me, and some of them, if you do it that way, you're going to hear shit talk the rest of the year. Like it's not going to be fun because Pitt fans are going to say we beat you. True, but if you win the Big 12, why do you really care? Like that's the goal.
Oh yeah.
When you start week 1.
I mean, and again, admittedly, like the year, we'll close it out on this. The year that everybody still has in their memories, if you live through it like we did, 2007. Like West Virginia, in some ways, was backing in as everybody in front of them from major conferences lost, and them winning the bit. Champions of the Big East, which they were, and then lose to Pitt in a 2-team system. And it's the 7th ranked LSU playing number 2. Previously was ranked 7th, and they leap up into the game. So that was a wacky college football season where they were getting in by virtue of backing in the conference
title. But this
title
format, that can't even happen now.
So
in this format, because in this format, even if you lose to Pitt, they would win the major conference. They would still won the Big East. They would get what they in this format. They would have been
guaranteed.
They would have been guaranteed.
Slot. Yeah,
they would have already been in. So you do ruin that.
No, get into the dance. The dance is bigger now, as we said. The tent is going to get even bigger, maybe even bigger than that, to 16 or something ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean the Duke's Mayo Bowl means less and less as you get more playoff spots. So
this is true. Well, that's in.
I mean, getting in a bowl game,
another scenario.
Yeah, but I get it. Getting in a bowl game was better than not because you were supposed to win 4 games. You won 9. That was a prove it year. I get it. But now it's a 12-team playoff. You just won 9.
The calculus changes now in a 12-team playoff.
Yeah,
absolutely.
6-7 wins is not going to be a successful year. And the barometer with the program wins is 9-10 wins in a conference title. So they win 7, that's unsuccessful. We'll see what happens. But just leaving you with those questions here. We'll get into them more in future shows. Yeah. Interesting to leave those out there for people to think about. I think one's easier than other. I think that latter question is easier. You got to get in the playoff versus just caring about rivals. The other one I could see, and I almost do think we need to see the money. I'm bringing it up without knowing the exact payout of what that would be. And obviously it's hard to know now because you're including ticket sales, assuming it would be sold out. And
if it was I think if it's a 7-figure, so meaning 10 million or more number, that could change my mind, because as you and I both know, it's an athletic department that operates with very thin margins, sometimes profitable, which is very rare in the 139
most programs.
Right. Most programs are not profitable. West Virginia's done a good job of towing that line, and they've got the NIL support and all that type of stuff now. So no, an infusion of that wouldn't just be and it hasn't just been football related. It goes down to everything else in the in the athletic department. So yeah, that could change my mind, knowing a very specific number, but it's one of your better comparison type of questions. I was a fan. So there you go.
I'm glad you were a fan. That's not the first time I brought it up, but it's the first time on the HBS.
Sometimes you bait me with, like, I know George is going to pick this one because butterflies, unicorns, and rainbows, and then you pounce on me from the other side of logic.
Well, see, the different. I will say,
in this case, it was more of a razor thin margin.
Well, I will say that sometimes, because I've heard that criticism with my questions as well, that the issue of us doing the show so long and knowing each other so long is a lot of the time, even if I ask the question well, I already know your answer. Yes. And that does take it away, because I know your answer. So before the show, I'm like, I got him. Like, he can. It's like a politician in a debate. Like, I'm ready. Whatever answer you got, I got both fronts covered. But this one, I did not know where your answer was.
That's why I was so pleased with the question.
I did not know your answer, but I still did take the other side just for the purpose of this. But I could see both sides of that coin.
Yeah.
And I do know the program's answer. But
100%.
they also were towing that line too. They got to give me that answer.
100%.
But I do find it interesting that a lot of fans would prefer to freaking beat Pitt over winning the Big 12, which is just ludicrous.
No, that's stupid. Yeah,
that is ludicrous. Almost a misunderstanding of college football today. I get you want it to be what it was 15 years ago, but here in the year of our Lord 2024, that ain't it. To steal a phrase from my friend and colleague Will Graves, that ain't it. Like, that ain't it.
Let's take a quick time out here on the HBS. When we come back, we'll spin the football around and take a look at the NFL side of the ledger and some of these starting quarterbacks that have been announced and our thoughts on them, and how that bodes for the coming NFL season. That is next on the HBS. All right, give me 1 second while I get some water. All right. Welcome back. Oh, sorry. Welcome back inside the Howitzer and Buzz-saw Show. George the Howitzer Gerbo.
Mike the Buzz-saw Asti.
Rounded out with NFL talk. And we've got a lot of teams pinning their hopes on young quarterbacks. Got a lot of teams taking young quarterbacks and then not doing anything with them. And then we have some young quarterbacks that have been injured, unfortunately. Of course, Caleb Williams was the number 1 overall draft pick, and Jaden Daniels. Caleb Williams, of course, was going to start in Chicago. The Commanders made an unnecessary announcement that Jaden Daniels was going to be their starter for Washington, which, of course, is going to be the case there. There's no more fiddling around with perennial backup white quarterbacks that you've never heard of and will never hear of again. Talking about you, Taylor Heineke, and Sam Howell, for that matter. Some other things that have popped up during the preseason. Unfortunately, JJ McCarthy, the aforementioned JJ McCarthy, national champion at Michigan,
right,
tore meniscus, and so recommended to have surgery. And a lot of people,
some people thought about that dark horse team before that too.
Yeah, and we'll touch on this here in a second. Somebody's like, "Oh my God, it's it's a bummer," and I'm like, I guess it was if you thought he was going to compete for the spot. And I just don't think that
from even if you didn't think they were good, though, don't you want him to get games under his belt? Like, you figure he was going to play at some point. You want a maturation.
You figured he was going to play at some point. I was never. I didn't personally. Sure. I didn't personally doubt that they weren't going to go into the season with Sam Darnold as the starter.
Yeah.
After getting rid of Kirk Cousins, like that's still a potential. There's other pieces there that they have. It's still a good team in terms of some of the nuts and bolts, and that you weren't just going to throw a rookie in there to lead it. The same goes down in Atlanta, where Michael Penix has not touched the field, and we're just
it was 8th overall pick there, despite signing a free agent quarterback that throws for 4,000 yards every year.
It's an announced Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love type of situation where he is just gonna just ride it out.
The rookie's like 27 years old already.
Of course he is a little bit older.
He's older. He's gonna be 30 years old by the time you're giving him the keys to the Cadillac here when Kirk Cousins wants to walk away.
And we've got the situation in Pittsburgh with, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, and of course this means that as soon as we drop this episode that there will be an announcement, but there's been no official announcement in terms of Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, and they both kind of have had meh performances if you're a Steelers fan and wanted to actually see something out of one of them to give you confidence over the other. And again, take it with not only a grain of salt, but a huge salt lick that you leave out for the deer in the backyard, because
Kenny Pickett was in the Hall of Fame off the preseason last year. Kenny Pickett was lighting it up in the preseason last year, and everybody was all excited. And obviously that ended with him not even on the team anymore and a lot of drama. So you never know. Preseason, you can't read too much into it. For my money, there's been no announcement, but it's Russell Wilson's job to lose. What has literally been said, if you recall, Mike Tomlin said Russell Wilson is in pole position. He's been saying he's in pole position. And Mike Tomlin leans to veterans. He even leaned to a veteran before Pickett got in there when Trubisky started. He always will lean to the veteran. So as you're saying, nobody has impressed. So when in doubt, you're going to lean to the veteran. Russell Wilson's the veteran.
The Super Bowl champion.
Super Bowl champion, Pro Bowler. He wasn't nearly what he was in Seattle when he was in Denver, but he did, by the way, throw 25 plus TDs and only, so many interceptions. He did fumble it and was sacked a lot. I get it. We saw a lot of the sacks in the Steelers' last preseason game. But Justin Fields has not impressed either. He's never had the peaks of that Russell Wilson has had in his career. He's young, but giving him the keys to a team that you feel like is a contender, that you have a lot of talent on your team as well, even though maybe you've underachieved in recent years, you were just in the playoffs. That would be a big gamble for Tomlin. I don't see it. I think Russell Wilson's going to start, and then I'm sure week 6, 7, we're having the same conversation again. They win 2, they lose 3, or they win 3 and they lose 2. It'll just be the same Steeler type of thing. They go back and forth. Russell Wilson will be good here. He'll be bad there. And then maybe Justin Fields takes over middle of the season. We don't know about the future because both their contracts will be up. But I wouldn't be shocked if Russell Wilson starts the season and Justin Fields ends the year. Wouldn't surprise me at all. They went through a whole quarterback carousel last year, even when they went into the playoffs with Mason Rudolph leading the way. You never know with the Steelers. But week one, I would be blown away. I'll tell you this. I'd be blown away if Justin Fields starts, because if you do that, George, you can't go backwards. Like if Justin Fields starts week one, you're riding out the season looking to sign him in the offseason. You can't go to Russell Wilson then in week 5 when he's the veteran. Like, what is the point of him? That just wouldn't make sense to me. I think Wilson's going to start, but unless he looks awful in the next game, nothing's blocked in, but I definitely think Wilson's going to start and never really bite into this being a legit quarterback controversy.
At any point that Pittsburgh entertains a hybrid Wildcat-y type of something or other where Fields plays, let's say, 8 to 10, 6 to 8 plays a game or something like that, or is it just...
I could see him coming in 1 or 2. 8 to 10, no. 8 to 10, okay. I can't see 8 to 10. I could see 1 or 2. I could see packages for him. I don't think there's any chance he's returning punts that has been brought up months ago. Nah.
And it's going to be, and the big wrinkle be, but I the big wrinkle being no Matt Canada anymore, and that Artie Smith comes in off of his coaching time in Atlanta with some actual weapons at his disposal in the backfield, and does this look like a really, really fun run and gun type of offense.
Hasn't yet, but you're sure.
Of course, hasn't yet. Yeah, of course. We'll see when we get to the.
It could. I mean, there's still talent there. George Pickens could turn it up another level. Pat Fryermuth could turn it up another level. Najee's trying to get money. He could turn it up another level. The offensive line, by the way, has been a major problem in the preseason. That needs to be a lot better, no matter who's at QB. And Zach Frazier is now the starter because of the injury. So he's going to be the center of the future to me. This is a Wally Pipp, Lou Gehrig situation. However, doesn't mean he's going to be a Pro Bowler this year. He's still going through a rookie growing pain maturation process. He's not been perfect when he's been out there, even though he's good, and I believe in him. So you never know. They also probably do have a need still for another receiver. I don't buy them getting Ayuk. I never bought them getting Ayuk. And even the reports, George, if you believe NBC, get this. And this really makes the whole thing, a mockery, which I've always kind of believed it was. NBC reported that when the Steelers were talking to Ayuk's camp and they got approval to be able to talk to him, and they were really in rumors and they're moving towards the finish line of pulling off that trade, at one point they asked him to take a discount on the next contract they were going to give him. That tells me, as you're laughing, sounds like a Mike Florio story. well, hold on. But I prefaced it. This is his reporting. I don't even know if it was Mike Florio, but it was NBC. But if true, we'll do the social media big if true. It's their reporting. If true, because by the way, that sounds like a Steelers thing to do, even though it's a new regime, even though you can argue about reporting. If true, that tells me they never were going all in for Ayuk. They would take him if everything falls in their lap. He'd be a luxury, but they're not going guns blazing aggressive for him. It would just be a scenario that they sure would love to have him, but they aren't going to do everything for him. Because, George, why would you believe a player that is mad at his team that just went to the Super Bowl because of money? He wants a big contract there. He wants Jefferson money. He wants A.J. Brown money. Why would you believe he would leave a Super Bowl team who wouldn't pay him for a team that lost in the first round to also not pay him? Why would that make sense? If he's going to not get paid, he might as well stay on a better team. He wants money. This is about money. He's not going to take a discount for you. He's not from Pittsburgh. He's not from Monroeville. He's not from the region. He didn't grow up a Steeler fan. They're asking people to take his hometown discount as if they grew up down the street in the North Shore. The man is playing for the Niners, okay? They have been a better team. They're on the precipice. They feel like they can take that next step. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But if he's mad at them for money, why would he go to you for less money? So if that is true, that tells me that was never going to happen. They're not going to do it, and that's not a thing. So that's still a hole there that could be an issue for this team. But I do think Wilson's going to start. I don't think the offense is going to be as great as people think it's going to be, even though I think the Smith hire made sense. And obviously Canada had to go. But there's still some holes there, and the offensive line is the major problem. So if the offensive line doesn't get better, it doesn't matter who's QB. Period.
Yeah, it's getting the machine and the engine to work, which it seemingly hasn't in Pittsburgh for what feels like 5 years at this point, fully. I want to, speaking of Pittsburgh, watch this segue. Last year, former Miami Dolphins coach Brian Flores was on the staff of Mike Tomlin, as Tomlin gave him an opportunity there to kind of rebound a little bit. He's now the DC in Minneapolis. And Tua Tagovailoa,
but the Minnesota Vikings, yes.
Yeah, well, he's in Minneapolis.
In Minneapolis. Yes, no one puts it that way. That was
I gave you the city, Minneapolis Vikings. I gave you the city they're located in. Too geography focused there. He's in Minnesota. He's in the land of 10,000 lakes. And this week, Tua Tagovailoa, in an interview with the Dan Le Batard Show with Stu Gatz, kind of gave, a hypothetical talking about his time. Didn't mention Flores by name, but gave compare and contrasting his time with Brian Flores as the coach in Miami and with Mike McDaniel as the coach in Miami. And that's, I feel like, was well reported that, there was an issue there, or just that it wasn't a good fit. And of course, between those two specifically, and of course, Flores went to Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's now retired and was with the Dolphins at the time, and went to him multiple times in cases and helped for the Dolphins to win some games in those situations. But at the same time, kind of perhaps stunted to his growth and arguably almost cost him his time in the NFL in many ways. And so in comes Mike McDaniel, and instills a vastly different culture, and a super knowledgeable guy, Ivy League educated and everything, and now has the Dolphins primed, got into the playoffs last year, and now has them primed potentially
catering
again.
To Tua. I mean, catering to Tua. The whole thing caters to Tua. It's almost like that's the coach that gets the most out of Tua.
Yeah, this is our guy. We're building the franchise around him in some aspects. Of course, they got a lot of weapons there, but it was interesting, to hear Tua, who previously has been measured both in his time at Alabama and in his first couple years in the league, super guarded, super private. I would say, from covering his brother, that's kind of a family thing. They're private in many ways, and Tua is in many ways the exact opposite of his brother Talia, who was a little super quiet when he talked and more reserved. And you get some him to smile and things like that, but was not as extemporaneous as Tua has been, even when Tua was leading Bama to a national title and everything. And so now we've got kind of phase two of the NFL, phase two of Tua in the NFL, where he's willing to be like, yeah, I was wronged here, and felt like I was treated like crap. And Flores, as opposed to running from it, not necessarily corroborated it, but a little bit of a mea culpa that, yeah, maybe, if my actions were wrong, I'm sorry for that. It wasn't a, no, this is BS. Normally in the NFL, when you get these accusations come from one way or another, you kind of get the, I'm going to, obfuscate and deny. And maybe there's his reading of it, my reading of it. No, Flores kind of implicitly admitted this week that he did some things that he probably shouldn't have, and treated the situation wrong. And it was kind of refreshing to see on some levels, but it's created a whole nother, firestorm of activity around, was it the right thing for Tua to kind of put that out there? And again, I want to stress that he didn't mention Flores by name, but he was asked by Le Batard to compare and contrast. But he's obviously, and Tua knows what he's doing. He's obviously talking about Flores, and I'm not playing a race card here, but it has been very hard for black coaches to get head coaching jobs in the NFL.
Yeah, and he's criticizing an African American coach and praising a white coach, and the African American coach was and
Flores has successfully built his way back into another prominent role, because he did not have a prominent role in Pittsburgh. Prominent role again as a defensive coordinator in Minnesota under Kevin O'Connor, and potentially could be in the line for another head coaching job.
Well, and there's a belief of some that he never should have been fired at Miami, because they were a 10+ win team, even though Tua wasn't fully unlocked yet, but they were winning games. It wasn't like they were a 3-4 win team. They were holding water, and they were a competitive team. And then he was let go. That was a major drama a few years ago. Nobody hired him to a major level. Tomlin kind of took him under his wing, and now he has a DC job, and who knows from the future. But it is harder, and the argument always is, and it's hard for you and I to discuss this because we don't know the life of an African American, obviously. But the argument always is that, yes, everything should be by merit, but it's harder for an African American to get the benefit of the doubt or get back in if you fail. A lot of coaches, Bill Belichick, he didn't win a championship with the Browns, and then obviously we know what happened with New England. Usually your second job in the NFL is when you truly succeed. Flores didn't get that opportunity. He didn't really lose that much. We've seen coaches linger around. Jeff Fisher was 500 for 20 years and kept lingering around. There are those examples. An African-American would never be able to be the darling that Jeff Fisher was for perennially being 500. He would have been fired years and years prior to when Fisher's career kind of eventually ended. So that's that opinion that it's just harder of a life for an African-American to budge in there. There are many that should have had the opportunity that hasn't received an opportunity yet. Flores got one. He won some games, didn't win a championship, but who was gonna? No one's done it in Miami in 40 years. And then he was fired kind of unjustly. That opinion exists. But I do think, George, more than one thing can be true here. I do think it sucks to have someone fire shots at not just an African-American, but at Flores, because my defense of Flores would be he's already dealt with enough unfairness. This doesn't help him. Like to ding holes at his resume that people were previously saying he was wronged for being fired at. And then, yes, to his credit, he took it on the chin and said, I could have learned and I could have done better. And maybe you're correct. Sure, that's great. It's nice to hear that. It is refreshing to hear that. But he didn't need to take any more bullets, and it's catching strays. He didn't say anything. He's sitting at home trying to coordinate a defense here, and all of a sudden Tua goes on a very popular digital platform in his market, by the way. As much as Dan Le Batard is a career journalist in the national media, he's a Miami guy. He wears a Marlins hat during the shows. He's an admitted Dolphins guy. He's all about Miami.
That's the Stephen A. Smith line.
But I mean, he's if you're asking him to pick here, Tua or the guy that's no longer there, he's going to go with the QB. It was a very, maybe, George, honestly, this might have been how Dan Le Batard, in his brilliance, thought he could get something out of Tua, because he knew, I'm very Miami friendly. You can talk to me. And then he ends up blowing up because he got a hot take. And I do think I love Dan Le Batard, but there is some hypocrisy there, because he does rag on hot take artists, and he got a hot take and made money off it. That's a hot take, and he's making money. He does
rag on hot take, yes.
But
he
didn't say the hot take, but we know the cash flow is going to his way, and that's a hot take.
Yeah.
So
and he's not deleting the show. It was the last question of their interview too, which was also kind of ironic.
But he knew what he knew. Like, hey, by the way, he knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing. He's tapped into that community. He knew what he was doing. So it sucks that he did it. I do think it's refreshing how Flores responded. And you could certainly argue that if you look at it separate from records and what was fair to Flores, Tua is better under McDaniel than he was Flores. Sure. Flores was a career defensive coach. He's now a coordinator. He's a defensive guy.
Yes.
Mike McDaniel's an offensive guru that unlocks and basically plays a video game. He's closer to his age. He's more friendly to him. They sit next to each other on the plane. They kind of have bonded. It's a different vibe there. You could say that will it win a championship or not is a different question, because are they good enough on defense? But it definitely has unlocked Tua, even while he's dealt with some injuries too. The Flores wasn't able to do that. And Flores is very mature. You mentioned covering Tua's brother for connection there. I did cover Flores during a time when I was covering the Steelers and more directly as a beat guy, not just kind of quasi in Pittsburgh media. So I got to know Flores a little bit. He's a very honest guy. And George, it's very rare to hear someone be so self-reflective and say, you could be right in what you're criticizing me for, but that's Flores. And that doesn't mean the criticism was fair. Like, yes, it could be true, but why are you firing shots for no reason at a guy that is no longer there? It's one thing if he's there and you hate it. He's gone. He's not coming back. Leave it go. But it is refreshing the way this was handled. This is a weirdness that we're not used to. Usually someone would fire shots on a podcast and then Flores would either ignore or he would come back and say, yeah, but you're overrated and this is this. I mean, we're used to the George Karl comment where you hear one, you're going to hear the other. They go back and forth and it's just, guys, you're too old for this. Let's move on. But you didn't get that here. Flores basically kind of took the L on the chin, almost being more mature. And I'll throw it to you back with this, George. You know what this shows me as well? Even if Tua was correct in what he said and Flores took it, for a franchise QB that there's still some question marks on, this shows an immaturity on Tua. This is immature. He's no longer there. He's been fired. You got your way. Maybe you were part of that decision, which now leads me to ask. That would be a follow-up. Were you asked what happened to Flores back then because it was controversial? Were you part of that decision? Clearly, you didn't like the scenario. Yeah, you're flourishing now, but there's still more to do. What is the point of this? What are you accomplishing? And if the answer is just being a dick or airing out grievances, that's immature. That's immature. It is.
I think I think it's one of the very rare cases where you've got both sides are right in some ways. So for Tua, I do believe that Brian Flores mismanaged him and treated him unfairly during the time that he was his coach, and that and
maybe it
Tua,
justifies the firing. By the way, maybe they knew something we didn't know.
And Tua was going through the his concussion issues and everything during those tumultuous times for him, and I think Tua feels a little bit more emboldened to speak out now as well after this offseason, getting a contract extension and being secure in his place there. On Brian Flores' side, we, through very, mentioned NBC and Mike Florio here again, and maybe one other person, but very light reporting that nobody really talked about Stephen Ross tampering. The league found him tampering, and they docked the Dolphins draft pick of trying to get both Tom Brady and Sean Payton to come to Miami and revamp and get the franchise going.
But they weren't the only team. He also reported the Raiders were trying to get Brady and do all the same type of thing. I mean, it wasn't just the Dolphins.
But Flores has kind of that specter going on as well. Hey, I'm a defensive-minded coach. You've given me this guy. Yeah. And Tua wasn't a world beater in terms of statistics in college, very successful in college, but not the prototypical Manning type.
Wouldn't you have rather had Brady then, though? Because that was the year after Brady won a championship with Bruce Arians with the Bucks, or 2 years later.
That's a different discussion.
I bring
it up to say that Flores has that going on over his head too. And he's got a 14 to 17, however many years Fitzpatrick was in the league at that point. Year-old journeyman quarterback, and then he's got Tua Tagovailoa, who has pedigree in terms of what he did in college, but it doesn't translate exactly to the NFL level in the same way as it does for other pro-style quarterbacks. And so he's got that going on, and then this whole thing over his head where your owner is kind of actively working to undermine you in some ways when he's shopping for a new quarterback and a new coach. So I think Flores had some undue pressure on him that he may have taken out on Tua, and Tua at the same time now later comes back and they kind of air the thing, and Flores approached it amicably, and hopefully it's just, this has been aired. People got things they need to get off their chest, and we can move on from it. That's my butterfly unicorn rainbows take on it.
Yeah, I stand that it's immature to air it a couple years later. Like, it just is immature to air it. It's just an immature thing to do, to air it. A mature person who's you're articulating he's having more success since breaking up than Flores has had, fair or not,
go to Flores directly with his concern and say, "Hey, you wronged me."
I'll drop a political comment in this climate. It looks like Tua's punching down. That looks like you're going low. Like, you're going low. Do you respond by going higher, or do you go lower? Some want to go high. Some want to go lower.
Tua still has his position, and Brian Flores lost his position, which was the
and it's not. I'm just saying that he's punching down, and he's going. He even a better phrase is sick, even with the same political analogy. It looked like Tua went low. That's going low. That's going low. So if you don't like the vibe of people who go low, then why are you liking what Tua's doing? You know what I'm saying? That's the same thing. He's airing grievances years later that accomplishes nothing. And I think, honestly, what happened, George, when you think about it, you have a young quarterback who won big in college, but obviously the NFL is different. There's a lot of pressure there. He's not necessarily built to handle a beating, but yet has a cannon for an arm. And you have a defensive coach helping him right away out of college. That was a bad marriage. Like, Flores is not a quarterback guru like Mike McDaniels is. And in this era, maybe you're better to have a quarterback coach be a head coach than to have a defensive guy do it, because this is an era where you got to score points. The QB usually wins. This isn't the 2000 Ravens are not going to exist anymore in this current NFL. So that marriage was just bad. But George, if you're in a bad marriage and then you break up the marriage and you ask for the divorce, you're not the victim. You are the aggressor to break this up. 3 years later to then come out and say, well, here's why I didn't want to continue this marriage, because this guy sucked at this and he was bad here and that. That just comes across like, what are we accomplishing here? And as you said, maybe the only thing we're accomplishing is Tua needed to really see a therapist, and instead he talked to Dan Le Batard on the couch and he had grievances. Yeah. But a mature person would have probably seen a therapist instead of going on a podcast with Dan Le Batard. So that, again, I think there was some immaturity there, and I do think there was some hypocrisy there on Le Batard's part, because he's making money off a hot take, and he knew what he was asking. If he was asking something about the Raiders, I could see, because he's tapped into the Miami market, not Vegas. But that's his bread and butter. He knew what he was getting probably before he even asked it. So the whole thing probably didn't need to happen, and Flores did answer it in a surprising way, but unbecoming way maybe for some, but a way that kind of is refreshing. And when you bring up refreshing, going back to college football here as we end the show, I do want to bring up, and this is some dap to a guy that never gets any dap, because he is normally mundane. His personality is mundane, usually wins anywhere from 8 to 10 games. The offense is boring at Iowa. Kurt Ferentz, though, he's getting suspended. And it was, but it was a recruiting issue in terms of contact with a kid. And his presser, we never get this, George. This is really refreshing. He did not do anything other than say, yep,
accept responsibility.
I'm guilty. I did it. It was nobody else's fault. He didn't throw anyone under the bus. He didn't say the intern was sending a text message. He didn't blame somebody else that you easily could get rid of. He's the guy going to get a statue in Iowa someday. And he said, nope, it was me. I made an error in judgment. I did this. I broke a rule. I knew the rule. I shouldn't have broke it. I'm taking the punishment. We don't got to cover it tomorrow. I'm not going to be here. It's not going to drag out. We're not going to the Supreme Court over this BS like every other coach in America wants to do. We're going to do this. I'm an adult, and that's the end of it. That was really refreshing. I can't even remember the last time we've got that from a player or coach in any level of sports. Usually, even if you know you're guilty, they're trying to, well, let's argue it. Let's go to the union. Let's drag this out. I mean, George, we're talking about, there has been people that we knew were guilty that literally got Congress involved. And because they just wanted to drag things out. No, I'm guilty.
Jim Harbaugh fought tooth and nail last year, and it still ended up in a 3-game suspension at the end of the season, in addition to the 3-game suspension he had at the beginning of the season.
But my problem is Harbaugh's in the NFL now. He can't get suspended in the NFL for what he did in college, and he's still talking about it. He's still saying he did nothing wrong. He had a press. George,
listen, you ran away. It's okay. They can't. Yeah, it's fine. NCAA can't come and get you. And
right,
so far,
he did the Pete Carroll thing. I actually do like Harbaugh and root for him with the Chargers, and hope he resurrects Herbert and makes him even better than he's been. But at the same time, he had a press conference where he said he did nothing wrong at Michigan. I mean, what the hell are we talking about here? You mean he did nothing wrong? If you did nothing wrong, you're a moron then.
Suspended you knew for 6 games. He was suspended for half the season.
Yeah, he was half the season when he won a national title. He was suspended for half the year.
Coach more of those games than he did.
And for multiple violations. It wasn't just about spying. There was recruiting violations. There was a lot of things going on. It was a whole Big Ten conspiracy of trying to upset the apple cart with Michigan, and they still win a national title. Is just hilarious. But in the midst of all of that, you get a very refreshing, I did it, my bad, shouldn't have done it. You caught me. Let's move on. And maybe you could argue there should be a tougher punishment, but that was very refreshing. We never get that. So, I mean, it'd be better not to commit infractions, but of course, no one's perfect. So that was nice to see. We really never get that.
That will put a nice bow on this edition of the Howitzer and Buzz-saw Show. A reminder to find us wherever you get podcasts on Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, Google, now YouTube, and more. Yeah. Just search Howitzer to find us. And also check out Hyphen Podcast Group on socials and online, the Morgantown-based podcast collective that we are a part of, bringing great podcasts to the people. hyphenpodcastgroup.com, as well as hyphenuniverse.com for all the music that you hear right here each time on the HBS, courtesy of our friend B Hyphen. Check out his new album anywhere you get music.
And of course, you can find us on social at Mike Asti 11, at Gerbo 3, at Howitzer Buzz-saw for the show handle. And if you can't find us with all those different ways to find us everywhere we are, and Kellen too, then you are just not trying hard enough.
This has been another edition of the Howitzer and Buzz-saw Show, where we conquer preseason expectations quarterback controversies, and sports radio.
One day at a time.